Watauga Lake is a TVA reservoir in the mountains of northeast Tennessee, the particular body of water that the Watauga Dam created in 1948, when the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded a valley that had held communities and farms and the particular infrastructure of mountain life for 2 centuries before the water came and covered it. The lake sits at approximately 2,000 feet of elevation in the Cherokee National Forest. The surrounding terrain steep and forested, the coves that the flooding created cutting into the mountainsides with the particular geometry that reservoirs produce, the water filling the low ground and the high ground, remaining as the peninsulas and the ridges that give the lake its shape. My property is on one of those coves, a quiet inlet on the lake's eastern side, the cove extending maybe 300 yards into the mountainside, the water deep and still, and showing the particular dark surface that deep mountain water produces, the color, not the blue of shallow water, but the dark green-black of water that is deep enough that the light doesn't reach the bottom and that the surface reflects the forest and the sky with the particular fidelity of a mirror that has been laid on the mountain. The lake house was built in 1985 by a man who bought the lakefront lot from the TVA's surplus property program, the particular sale that the authority conducted when it released the shoreline lots that the reservoir had created and that the recreational market wanted. The house is modest, a frame structure with 3 bedrooms and a porch that faces the lake and the particular view that the cove provides. The water visible from every room that faces east, the lake, a constant presence in the living experience, the surface showing the weather and the light and the seasons with the particular display that a body of water provides to whoever lives beside it. The dock extends from the bank into the cove, 50 feet of wooden structure, the decking supported by posts that are driven into the lake bed and that hold the walking surface approximately 2 feet above the water level. The dock providing the access to the lake that lakefront properties require, the mooring for the boat and the platform for the fishing and the particular social space that docks provide, the sitting and the watching that people do when they're at the end of a dock, and the lake is in front of them, and the evening is warm, and the particular peace that water produces is available. The water at the dock's end is 70 feet deep. The cove drops steeply from the bank, the lake bed descending at an angle that puts the water at maybe 10 feet at the dock's near end and 70 feet at the far end. The particular depth that reservoirs produce in the coves, where the flooded terrain was steep and where the water filled the valley to a depth that the original terrain's grade determined. 70 feet of water beneath the boards at the dock's end, the depth sufficient to cover a 6-story building, the particular dimension of reservoir depth that says the bottom is far and that the surface is a membrane stretched over a void that extends below you for a distance, that the clear water makes visible for the first 20 feet, and that the darkness beyond 20 feet conceals. August of 2022. I'd been at the lake house for a week, the particular summer stay that the house provides, the annual retreat from my home in Johnson City to the lake where the heat is moderated by the water and the elevation, and where the August evenings are cool enough that the porch is comfortable and the sleeping is good, and the particular quality of mountain lake summer that East Tennessee provides is available for whoever is willing to make the 40-minute drive from town. I woke at approximately 2 in the morning, not from sound, not from any stimulus that I could identify as the trigger for the waking. The particular alertness of a body that has been pulled from sleep by something the conscious mind hasn't registered, the eyes opening with the immediate focus that the subconscious alarm produces when the environment has changed in a way that requires attention. The bedroom window faces the lake. The particular view that the house provides from the bed, the lake visible through the glass without lifting my head from the pillow, the window positioned by the builder to give the bedroom occupant the view that a lakefront bedroom should provide. The moonlight was on the water, the August moon providing enough illumination to show the surface of the cove and the dock extending into it, the wooden structure visible as a lighter line against the dark water, the dock connecting the bank to the depth. Someone was sitting at the end of the dock, a figure visible in the moonlight, seated at the dock's far end, the position showing the particular posture of a person sitting at the edge of a dock with their legs hanging over, the body upright, the legs extending beyond the dock's edge and hanging over the water, the posture, the universal posture of dock sitting, the particular relaxed position that people adopt when they're sitting at the water's edge and watching whatever the water presents. The figure was still, not the stillness of a person who is sitting quietly and who produces the small movements that sitting produces, the shift of weight, and the turn of the head, and the particular restlessness that living bodies maintain even in repose. The figure showed the complete absence of movement, the body in position at the dock's end, without any visible adjustment, the stillness total and maintained and showing the particular quality that I've described in other encounters, the stillness of something that is positioned rather than resting. I watched from the window. The particular observation of a man who is in bed in a house on a lake at 2 in the morning and who is looking at someone sitting on his dock who should not be there. The distance between the bedroom window and the dock's end approximately 70 feet, the moonlight providing enough detail to show the figure's outline and posture, without providing enough detail to show features or clothing, or the particular identifying characteristics that would convert the figure from a shape in a person. 30 minutes. I watched for 30 minutes. The figure did not move. Not once, not the smallest adjustment, not the turn of a head or the swing of a leg, or the particular shifting that a person does when they've been sitting in one position long enough that the body requests a change. The figure sat at the dock's end with the particular permanence of a fixture, the body as motionless as the posts that held the dock above the water. I did not go to the dock. The particular decision of a man who is alone at a lake house in a cove, where the nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away, and who is observing a figure on his dock at 2 in the morning, and who determines that the observation is sufficient and that the approach is not required. I watched, and the figure sat, and the lake held its moonlight, and the cove held its silence, and the 30 minutes passed with the particular slowness of time experienced during sustained observation of something that isn't moving, and that isn't leaving, and that is there. I fell asleep. The particular surrender of a body that has been alert and that has been watching, and that exhausts its vigilance and releases into sleep despite the mind's preference for continued observation. I woke at dawn with the immediate memory of the figure on the dock and the immediate look at the window and the dock showing in the morning light. The dock was empty. The figure was gone. The morning showing the dock in the full detail that daylight provides, the boards and the posts and the cleats and the particular infrastructure of a dock that is unoccupied, the end of the dock holding nothing but the boards and the morning dew. I went to the dock. The particular investigation that the morning permits and that the night did not, the walk from the house to the bank and from the bank onto the dock, the boards under my feet showing the dew that the August night had deposited, the particular moisture that condenses on surfaces that are cooler than the air and that coats every horizontal surface with a thin layer of water that the morning sun will evaporate. The dew at the dock's end showed a shape, not the uniform coating that the rest of the dock displayed, the dew covering every board in the consistent layer that overnight condensation produces. At the dock's end, in the center of the last 4 feet of deck surface, a section of boards was dry. The dew had not reached that section because something had been sitting on it, the body that had been sitting at the dock's end, preventing the dew from condensing on the boards that the body covered, the moisture depositing on the exposed boards, and not on the boards that were covered by whatever had been sitting there. The dry area showed the outline of a seated person. The shape was specific enough that the posture was readable, the particular impression of a human body in a sitting position, the legs extending to the dock's edge, where the dew resumed on the boards that the legs hadn't covered. The hips and the lower back showed in the dry area as the wider section of the shape. The shoulders and the upper back showed as the upper section. The outline was the silhouette of someone who had been sitting on the dock through the dew hours and whose body had prevented the moisture from reaching the boards beneath them. No footprints. The dew on the dock's boards showed the impressions that feet produce when they walk on a dew-covered surface, the particular dark marks that weight creates on wood that is coated with moisture. My footprints were visible from the bank end of the dock to the point where I was standing, the trail of dark marks showing my approach. No other prints. No marks between the bank and the dock's end that would indicate a person walking to the position where the dry outline sat. No prints leading away from the outline toward the bank or toward the water. The figure had been sitting at the dock's end without having walked to the dock's end. The outline was there, and the footprints were not, and the particular evidence of a person who arrived at a position and departed from a position without using the surface that connected the position to the shore was the evidence that the dew recorded and that the morning showed. It happened 3 more times that August. 3 more mornings when the dock's end showed the dry outline of a seated figure in the dew, the shape consistent, the position consistent, the absence of footprints consistent. Each time the outline showed the same posture, the same seated position, the same orientation toward the water. Each time the boards were dry where the body had been and wet where the body hadn't been, and the dock between the bank and the outline showed only my footprints from the morning's investigation. I sat on the dock at night. On 2 occasions I positioned myself at the dock's near end and watched the far end through the darkness, the particular vigil of a man who wants to see what produces the outline that the mornings reveal. I watched for hours. Nothing appeared. The dock's end remained empty. The morning showed no outline. The presence that produced the shape in the dew did not produce the shape on the nights that I watched. The particular behavior of a phenomenon that operates in the absence of observation and that the observation prevents. Someone sits on my dock. At night, in the hours when the dew forms, in the particular window of darkness between the late night and the early morning, when the moisture condenses on the boards, and when whatever sits at the end of my dock is sitting there, legs over the edge, looking at the lake, looking at 70 feet of water that covers whatever the valley held before the dam was built and the water rose. The figure looks at the lake. The posture that the dew outline records is the posture of watching, the particular orientation of a body that is facing the water and that is looking at the water and that is sitting at the edge of the dock above 70 feet of depth in the hours when nobody is watching except the dew. I wonder what the figure is looking at, the surface that the moonlight shows, or the depth that the surface covers, the 70 feet of water that the dock's end sits above, the bottom that the flooding created when the valley became a lake and the farms became the lake bed, and the communities that the valley held were covered by the water that the dam produced. Someone sat on my dock before the dock was there. Someone sat on the bank that the dock extends from and looked at the valley that the lake now fills. Someone who watched the land the way the figure watches the water. And the dew records the sitting, and the outline dries in the morning, and the footprints that should lead to the dock's end are not there. And the figure sits, on the dock, over the water, over the valley, over whatever the lake covers at 70 feet. Watching. Every night I don't watch. In the dew, in the dark, at the end of the dock, where the water is deep and the bottom is far, and someone sits and looks at what the surface holds, or what the surface hides. Lake Glenville sits at 3,500 feet in the mountains of Jackson County, North Carolina, which makes it one of the highest reservoirs in the eastern United States. The particular body of water that the Thorpe Dam created in 1941 when the Tuckasegee River was dammed, and the valley behind the dam filled with the water that the mountains provided and that the dam held, and that has been sitting in the valley for 82 years, covering whatever the valley contained before the water rose. The lake is surrounded by the particular terrain that western North Carolina produces at 3,500 feet. The ridges steep and forested, the coves cutting deep into the mountainsides, the shoreline irregular and complex, the water filling every low place that the terrain provided with the particular thoroughness that gravity and time produce when water is given a valley to fill. My wife Amy and I have been renting the same lake house on Glenville for 6 years, the annual October week that we've built into our calendar as the particular retreat that the fall season provides, the combination of mountain color and lake water, and the cooling temperatures that October at 3,500 feet delivers, producing the experience that we return to each year because the experience is worth returning to. The house sits on a cove on the lake's western shore, a quiet inlet that extends approximately 200 yards into the mountainside, the cove narrow and deep, the water dark with the tannins that the surrounding forest leaches into it, the surface still in the cove, because the cove is protected from the wind that the main lake receives. The cove is deep, the particular depth that reservoirs produce in the sections where the original terrain was steep, the valley floor that the cove occupies having been a drainage that descended sharply from the ridge to the river, the water filling the drainage to a depth of approximately 40 feet at the cove's deepest point and tapering to the shallows at the back where the terrain climbs out of the water and becomes the mountainside that the house sits. I know the water level. 6 years of October visits, the same cove, the same dock, the same particular relationship between the water surface and the bank and the dock posts, and the particular markers that a person develops when they spend time beside a body of water, and when the water level becomes part of the environmental data that the brain monitors, the surface sitting at the level it sits at, the dock floating at the height that the level determines, the banks showing the particular waterline that the stable surface maintains. October of 2023, We arrived on a Saturday afternoon, the sixth annual visit, the house showing the particular welcome that a familiar rental provides, the rooms known, the view known, the dock and the cove, and the particular October quality of the lake at this elevation, known and anticipated and delivered by the landscape with the reliability that 6 years had confirmed. The first 3 days were normal. The lake was the lake. The cove held its water at the level that the dam controlled. The surface at the particular elevation that October at Glenville provides. The dam maintaining the fall drawdown level that the utility company uses for winter preparation. The surface may be 2 feet below the summer level. The particular adjustment that dam-controlled reservoirs undergo in the fall when the operators lower the water for flood control capacity. Tuesday night. I woke at approximately 3 in the morning. Not from sound, the particular silence of a mountain lake at 3 a.m. providing no stimulus that could have produced the waking. The waking was the particular body alarm that other experiences have described, the unconscious detection of a change that the conscious mind hadn't registered, the eyes opening with the focused alertness that says something is different. The sound was different, not the sound of the lake, which at 3 a.m. should have been the particular quiet of still water in a protected cove, the minimal lap of wavelets against the bank and the dock, providing the acoustic backdrop that lakefront sleeping produces. The sound was the absence of the water sound. The wavelets were not lapping. The dock was not producing the particular creak that a floating dock generates when the water moves it. The acoustic signature of the cove had changed from water present to water absent, the particular silence that the cove would produce if the water were not there. I went to the window. The bedroom faces the cove, the particular view that the house provides, the water visible through the glass as a dark surface that the moonlight shows. The moonlight showed the cove. The water was gone. Not reduced, not lowered by the feet that dam adjustments produce. Gone. The cove, which at bedtime had held water at the normal October level, the surface maybe 6 feet below the dock's edge at the bank, was showing the exposed lake bed. The bank that the water normally covered was visible in the moonlight as a mud surface that descended from the waterline down to a level that was approximately 8 feet below the normal surface. The particular exposure that an 8-foot drop in water level produces, the banks showing the terrain that the water normally conceals. The stumps were visible. This was the detail that produced the particular quality of dread that the experience carried, the visual information arriving at my brain with the weight of something that should be hidden, and that was being shown. Tree stumps, the remnants of the trees that were cut when the reservoir was created in 1941, the trunks cut to maybe 2 feet above the valley floor and left standing as the water rose and covered them, the stumps sitting on the original terrain of the valley that became the lake bed, the particular evidence of a landscape that existed before the lake and that the lake has been covering for 82 years. The stumps were everywhere, the exposed cove bottom showing dozens of cut trunks, the stumps arranged in the particular pattern that a forest produces, the spacing natural, the distribution following the terrain, the stumps showing where the trees had grown before the dam was built and before the valley was flooded. The stumps were dark with the particular preservation that submersion produces, the wood saturated and discolored by 82 years of underwater exposure, the trunks showing the flat-cut surfaces that the Sawyers had produced in 1941 when they cleared the valley for the flooding that was coming. I woke Amy. The particular urgency of a person who needs a witness, the experience too significant to hold alone, the hand on the shoulder and the voice in the dark producing the wakeful companion that the moment required. She came to the window. She looked at the cove. She saw what I saw, the exposed banks and the stumps and the lake bed, and the particular evidence of a valley that had been underwater since before either of us was born, and that the cove was now showing as if the water had decided to reveal what it had been, covering. The main lake was unchanged. From the house's porch, which provided a view of the cove and a partial view of the main lake beyond the cove's mouth, the main lake surface was visible at its normal level, the water sitting at the October elevation that the dam maintained, the particular surface showing the moonlight at the height that the shoreline markers confirmed as normal. The marinas that were visible in the distance showed their docks at normal height. The main lake had not dropped. The cove had dropped. Our cove. The particular inlet that the house sat on, the 200-yard finger of water that extended into the mountainside. The cove had dropped 8 feet while the lake it was connected to had not dropped at all. The water in the cove receding from the water in the lake as if the cove were a separate body of water operating on a separate schedule. The connection between the cove and the main lake apparently insufficient to prevent the cove from emptying by 8 feet while the main lake held steady. This is not how water works. Connected bodies of water maintain the same level because the water flows between them until the levels equalize. The particular physics of fluid dynamics that ensures that a cove connected to a lake holds the same surface elevation as the lake. The cove was connected to the lake. I could see the connection, the mouth of the cove opening to the main lake approximately 200 yards from the house. The water at the cove's mouth should have been flowing in from the main lake to replace the 8 feet that the cove had lost. The physics that governs every body of water on Earth should have prevented the differential. We watched until dawn. The cove held its lowered level through the remaining hours of darkness. The exposed banks and the stumps and the lake bed visible in the moonlight and then in the pre-dawn gray, and then in the morning light that showed the details that the moonlight had suggested. The stumps were numerous, maybe 50 visible in the cove's exposed bottom, the cut trunks standing at their 1,941 heights, the surfaces flat, the wood dark, the 82 years of submersion showing in the particular condition of timber that has been underwater for longer than most people have been alive. The valley floor was visible between the stumps. The terrain that the water covered, the particular ground surface that had been the floor of a drainage before the dam and that had been the lake bed since, showing in the October morning light as a surface of mud and sediment and the particular debris that 82 years of lake bed accumulates. Among the stumps in the mud, shapes, objects that the sediment partially covered and that the exposure had revealed, the particular evidence of the valley's previous life, a foundation visible at the back of the cove where a structure had stood, the stone and the concrete of a building's base showing through the mud, the structure that the flooding had covered and that the water's retreat was now showing. Wednesday night, I stayed awake. I watched the cove from the window at approximately midnight. The water was still at its lowered level, the banks exposed, the stumps visible. At approximately midnight, the water began to rise. Not rapidly, not with the particular urgency of a flood. Steadily, the surface climbing the banks at a rate that I estimated at approximately 2.5 feet per hour, the water level increasing with the particular pace of a reservoir being filled, the cove accepting water that was coming from somewhere, and that was returning the surface to the level that the main lake maintained. 3 hours. The water rose for 3 hours, from midnight to approximately 3 a.m., the surface climbing 8 feet in those 3 hours, the banks disappearing beneath the water, the stumps submerging, the foundation at the back of the cove vanishing beneath the surface, the particular evidence of the valley's previous life returning to the concealment that the water had been providing for 82 years. By 3:30, the cove was full, the water at its normal October level, the surface matching the main lake, the connection between the cove and the lake functioning as physics demands, the levels equal, the surface continuous, the cove holding the water that the dam maintained, and that the cove had been holding all week and every year since 1941. The dam records showed no fluctuation. I checked. The utility company that operates Thorpe Dam maintains records of the water level with the particular precision that dam operation requires. The surface elevation documented hourly, the data available to the public through the utility's website. The records for Tuesday night and Wednesday morning showed no change. The lake level held steady at the October drawdown elevation throughout the period that our cove had been 8 feet low. The cove dropped and the lake didn't. The cove refilled and the lake didn't change. The particular physics that should have prevented the differential didn't prevent it, and the particular records that should have documented it didn't document it, and the particular evidence of stumps and foundations that the exposure revealed returned beneath the water in the cove, resumed its function as a cove, and the lake resumed its function as a lake, and the surface held steady. The valley is down there, beneath the water. The trees and the foundations and the roads and the particular infrastructure of a valley that was inhabited for 2 centuries before the dam turned it into a lake bed. The water covers it. The water has been covering it since 1941. And on one night in October, the water uncovered it, in our cove, for our eyes. The 8 feet of retreat showing the stumps and the foundation and the particular remains of a valley that the water took and that the water, for one night, gave back, and then took again. and the cove is full, and the surface is steady, and the stumps are underwater. Most nights, Fontana Lake sits in the mountains of western North Carolina at the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the reservoir that the Fontana Dam created in 1944, when the government needed the electricity that the dam would produce for the aluminum smelters that were producing the metal that the warplanes required and that the war effort demanded. The dam is the tallest in the eastern United States, 480 feet of concrete holding back a lake that stretches 29 miles through the mountain terrain that the Little Tennessee River once occupied, the water covering the valleys and the communities and the particular landscape that existed before the war, decided that electricity was more important than the valley and the people who lived in it. My family's property is on the North Shore, a section of Fontana Lake that is accessible only by boat or by a road that the Park Service maintains to a standard that the word maintains doesn't accurately describe the particular quality of a road that exists, because the government promised the communities that were displaced by the flooding that a road would be built along the North Shore to provide access to the cemeteries and the homesteads that the water didn't cover and that the families wanted to be able to reach. The road was never completed. The construction stopped in the 1970s, and the unfinished road became what the locals call the road to nowhere, the particular monument to a broken promise that the North Shore communities carry as part of their relationship with the lake and the dam and the government that built them. The lake house was built by my grandfather in 1973. He bought the lot from a family that had been displaced by the flooding and that had relocated to the North Shore above the waterline and that had eventually sold the lakefront parcel to my grandfather because the family was leaving the area and because the lot was worth more to someone who wanted to build than to someone who wanted to remember what the water had taken. My grandfather built the house and the boathouse in the same year, the two structures constituting the property's full improvement, the house on the hillside above the lake and the boathouse at the water's edge, connected by a path that descended the slope through the rhododendron that the North Shore grows in the particular density that the moisture and the shade produce. The boathouse is a simple structure, wooden frame, metal roof, the building size to hold a small boat, and the gear that lake recreation requires. The interior open, the floor at water level, the lake entering the boathouse through the opening at the front where the boat enters and where the door is. The door faces the lake. A wooden door, frame and panel construction, hung on 3 strap hinges that are bolted through the door frame and that have been holding the door for 50 years. The latch is a hook and eye, the particular hardware that boathouse doors use because the mechanism is simple and reliable and resistant to the moisture that the lake environment produces. The hook hanging from the door and the eye mounted on the frame and the hook dropping into the eye when the door is closed, gravity holding the hook in position, the weight of the metal maintaining the latch in the closed state without any additional mechanism. The door has been opening at midnight since March of 2023. I need to describe what opening means with the precision that the experience demands, because the word alone doesn't capture the particular quality of the event. The door doesn't drift open. The door doesn't swing on loose hinges in the wind. The door opens, the latch operates, the hook lifts from the eye, and the door swings on the hinges. The particular sequence of mechanical actions that opening a latch door requires occurring in the order that the hardware dictates. The hook first, then the swing, the mechanism functioning correctly, the hardware performing as hardware performs when a hand operates it. No hand operates it. I've watched. The particular vigil of a man who needs to see the mechanism that opens his boathouse door every night at midnight. The watching conducted from the path above the boathouse, where the hillside provides a vantage point that shows the door and the latch and the particular space in front of the door where a person would stand if a person were opening it. I've watched on 7 occasions. Each time, at midnight, the hook lifts from the eye. The metal rises against gravity from the closed position to the open position, and the hook clears the eye, and the door swings open on its hinges. No hand, no figure, no visible mechanism. The hardware operating without the operator, the latch opening without the touch that latches require. The hook lifts upward. This is the detail that the mechanism produces and that gravity makes significant. The hook hangs from a pivot on the door, and gravity holds it in the eye. Opening the latch requires lifting the hook, raising the metal against gravity to clear the eye. the particular physical action that requires force applied upward against the downward force that gravity maintains. The hook lifts at midnight against gravity, without assistance, the metal rising from the eye, with the particular smooth motion of hardware that is being operated by a hand, the lift controlled and deliberate, and showing the particular quality of an action that is being performed with intention rather than occurring through mechanical failure. I replaced the latch, the hook and eye removed, a slide bolt installed, the particular hardware that provides a more secure closure than the hook and eye, the bolt sliding into a receiver that holds it in position against lateral force, and that requires the bolt to be drawn back before the door can open. The slide bolt opened at midnight, the bolt drew back, the metal sliding in its housing, with the particular sound that a slide bolt produces when it's being retracted by a hand, the sound audible from the path above, the bolt clearing the receiver, and the door swinging open. I installed a padlock, a combination padlock through a hasp that I mounted on the door and the frame, the particular security hardware that a padlock provides, the shackle through the hasp preventing the door from opening because the hasp holds the door to the frame and the padlock holds the hasp closed. The padlock is a combination lock, the particular type that requires the correct sequence of numbers to open the shackle, and that cannot be opened without the combination. The door opened at midnight with the padlock engaged. The shackle was through the hasp. The combination was not entered. The padlock was locked. The hasp was held by the padlock, and the door was open. The wooden panels swung away from the frame, the door occupying the open position that a door occupies when it has been opened by someone who has unlatched it and pushed it and allowed the hinges to carry it to the fully open position. The padlock was still locked. The shackle was still through the hasp. The hasp was still mounted to the door and the frame. Every component of the security hardware was in its locked configuration, and the door was open. The particular impossibility of a door that has passed through a lock without the lock opening, the physical matter of the door separating from the physical matter of the hasp and the shackle and the padlock, without any of those components releasing their hold. I replaced the door. The entire door, the frame and panel assembly removed from the hinges, and a new door hung in its place. The new door, a solid slab rather than the frame and panel construction that the original had used. The solid door providing no gaps, no panels, no component that could be separated from the whole. New hinges, new hasp, new padlock. The new door opened at midnight. The same sequence, the same mechanical action. The padlock locked and the hasp engaged and the door open. The new hardware performing the same impossible operation that the old hardware had performed. The particular behavior transferring from the old door to the new door, with the consistency that said the behavior belonged not to the hardware, but to the opening. Not to the door, but to the act of opening the door. 11 months. The door has been opening at midnight for 11 months, every night. I've confirmed it on the nights I've been at the property, and the evidence of the open door in the morning confirms it on the nights I've been away. The door standing open in the morning showing that midnight performed its function whether I was watching or not. The boathouse faces the lake. The door opens toward the water. At midnight, every night, the door swings open, and the boathouse presents its interior to the lake, the dark space of the building exposed to the water, the opening providing access from the lake into the boathouse for whatever the lake holds, and whatever the midnight brings to the door that opens for it. I've sat inside the boathouse. On 2 occasions, I've positioned myself inside the building before midnight and waited for the door to open and watched the opening from the interior, the particular vantage of a man who wants to see what comes through a door that opens every night at the same time. The door opened, the latch lifted, the door swung. The lake was visible through the opening, the dark water showing the moonlight and the particular surface that Fontana Lake produces at night, the water still and deep and extending from the boathouse opening into the distance. Nothing came through. The door opened, and the opening held, and the lake showed its surface, and the midnight passed, and nothing entered the boathouse through the door that had opened for it. The door stood open, and the lake stood beyond it, and the access that the opening provided was access to nothing visible. But the door opens, every night, at midnight, the latch operating without hands, the hardware performing without the operator. The door providing access from the lake to the boathouse, with the particular regularity of a schedule that is being maintained and that the hardware serves. Something wants the door open, something that operates the latch without touching it, something that lifts the hook against gravity and draws the bolt, and passes the door through a locked padlock without opening the lock. Something that wants access between the lake and the boathouse at midnight, and that the door's opening provides, and that no lock I've installed has prevented. I've stopped locking the door. The particular surrender of a man who has replaced the hardware and replaced the door, and watched the midnight perform its function through every obstacle he's placed in its way. The hook and eye is back. The original hardware, the simple latch that my grandfather installed in 1973, the hook that drops into the eye and that gravity holds. And at midnight the hook lifts, and the door opens, and the boathouse faces the lake. And whatever wants the door open has the door open, and the lake is there. Through the opening, dark and deep, and holding whatever Fontana Lake holds beneath its surface and in its coves and along its north shore, where the communities that the dam displaced used to live and where the water now sits. And the door opens. Every midnight, for whatever comes. I live on a lake that was a valley. I say it that way because the distinction matters, and because the lake's identity as a former valley is not historical trivia, but the particular foundation on which everything that follows rests. The water that fills the basin occupying space that was occupied by something else for centuries before the dam was built and the river was stopped, and the valley began its conversion from air to water, from community to lake bed, from the particular terrain of human habitation to the particular terrain of recreational boating and lakefront property values. The lake is in the mountains of North Georgia, one of the reservoirs that the Army Corps of Engineers created in the 1950s when the federal government was building dams throughout the southern Appalachians for the stated purposes of flood control and hydroelectric power, and the unstated purpose of economic development. The dams converting free-flowing rivers into controlled reservoirs, and the reservoirs converting mountain valleys into lakes that the tourism industry would eventually develop into the particular economic engines that justify destruction of whatever the valleys held before the water rose. The valley that became my lake held communities, small mountain communities, the kind that the southern Appalachians produce in the valleys where the flat ground and the water and the fertile soil provide the particular conditions that settlement requires, the families establishing themselves along the river and the roads that followed the river, and the particular infrastructure of mountain life developing around the families over generations. A church, a store, a school, the particular civic and commercial establishments that a community of 300 or 400 people produces when the community is stable and when the economy that sustains it is functioning. The communities were relocated, the government bought the properties, the families were moved, the particular displacement that reservoir construction imposes on the people who occupy the land that the water will cover. The relocation was the government's obligation. The demolition of the structures was apparently not. The buildings were left standing. The houses and the church and the store and the school and the particular architecture of a mountain community left in place as the water rose around them and over them and converted them from buildings into submerged structures. The particular cost-saving decision that says the water will take care of the demolition and that the decades of submersion will do what the bulldozers would have done if the budget had included the bulldozers. My cove is above what was the main street. I know this because the County Historical Society maintains the maps that show the community's layout before the flooding, and because those maps, when overlaid on the current lake map, show the main street running approximately beneath the center line of my cove, the road that connected the community's buildings passing through the water that I look at every morning from my porch. The particular geography of a drowned road, visible only on the historical maps and in the knowledge of the people who remember where the road was before the water covered it. The buildings are down there. 70 years of submersion have done what 70 years of submersion does to wooden structures, the frames softening, the walls collapsing, the particular structural integrity that the buildings held when they were standing, diminishing year by year as the water and the sediment and the biological activity of the lake work on the materials that the builders assembled. The buildings are not intact. They're not the preserved structures of a perfectly underwater community waiting to be discovered by divers. They're debris, collapsed frames and scattered lumber, and the particular evidence of structures that have been underwater for 70 years and that the water has been taking apart for 70 years. I've lived on the lake for 9 years. The cove is my daily companion, the body of water that the house faces and that the porch overlooks, and that the morning show and the evening show, and that the particular rhythm of lakefront living makes as familiar as any room in the house. I know the cove's sounds, the particular acoustic environment that a mountain cove produces, the water against the bank, the fish breaking the surface, the turtles sliding from the logs, the particular repertoire of sounds that the cove generates, and that 9 years of listening has cataloged into the background noise that my brain processes without requiring my attention. September of 2022. The new sound arrived at approximately 3 in the morning on a Wednesday night. I was awake. The particular insomnia that September sometimes produces when the season is turning and the sleep patterns are adjusting to the changing light and the body is recalibrating its circadian rhythm. I was lying in bed with the window open, the September air cool enough that the open window provided comfortable sleeping temperature and warm enough that the blanket was sufficient, the cove audible through the screen with the particular proximity that a lakefront bedroom provides. The sound was not a water sound. The particular category of sounds that the cove produced, the water sounds and the animal sounds, and the wind sounds that constituted the cove's normal acoustic output, did not include the sound that I was hearing. The sound was structural, wood, the particular creak and groan of wood under stress, the sound that wooden buildings produce when they're bearing weight and when the forces acting on the structure shift and the framing adjusts, the particular voice of a building that is working, the joints in the beams and the particular connections that hold a wooden structure together, producing the sounds that structural mechanics generate when the loads change. I know this sound. I grew up in a house that produced it, the old frame house that my parents owned, and that the settling and the wind load and the temperature changes kept in a constant state of subtle adjustment, the house creaking and groaning with the particular voice that wooden buildings use to announce that they're still standing and still working and still performing the structural function that the builders designed them for. The sound from the cove was that sound. The creak of a wooden building adjusting to forces that were changing. The sound was coming from beneath the surface. The particular directionality of sound that water transmits, the acoustic energy traveling through the water and emerging at the surface, with the quality that underwater sounds produce when they reach the air, the particular muffled but clear character of sound that has traveled through a medium denser than air, and that arrives at the listener's ears with the particular transmission quality that water provides. The creaking was underwater. The building sounds were underwater. The structural adjustments that the sounds represented were occurring beneath the surface of the cove, at the depth where the community's buildings sat on the valley floor that was now the lake bed. I went to the porch. The cove was visible in the September moonlight, the water surface dark and still, the particular flat quality that the cove's protected position produces when the wind is absent and the water holds its mirror. The sounds were more distinct from the porch, the proximity to the water increasing the volume and the clarity, the creaking arriving from the cove's center, where the historical maps showed the main street running and where the buildings had stood before the water covered them. The sounds were multiple, not one building creaking, several, the particular chorus of structural sounds that a group of buildings produces when they're all adjusting at the same time, the creaks overlapping, the groans arriving from different positions in the cove, the sound distributed across the underwater terrain, the way the buildings were distributed along the main street, each structure producing its own particular voice, and the combined voices producing the particular acoustic texture of a community of buildings that were all doing something at the same time. Buildings don't creak underwater. This is the particular physical fact that the experience contradicts and that the sound insists upon. Wooden structures that have been submerged for 70 years are not structures that are bearing weight and adjusting to forces. They are debris. They are collapsed frames lying on a lake bed under the particular conditions that submersion produces. The water supporting the wood equally on all surfaces. The gravitational forces that produce creaking in buildings that are standing in air, not applicable to structures that are lying in water. There is no load for the beams to bear. There is no wind for the frames to resist. There is no occupancy for the floors to support. But the buildings are creaking. The particular sounds of occupied buildings, the voice that structures produce when they are being used, when the weight of occupancy is shifting on the floors, and the forces of habitation are acting on the frames, the sounds of buildings that are doing the job that buildings do, which is hold people and the weight that people represent and the particular forces that people's presence generates. The sounds come at 3 a.m., not every night. maybe 3 or 4 nights a week, the particular schedule that the phenomenon maintains, the creaking occurring on some nights and not on others, the pattern irregular enough that prediction is difficult but frequent enough that the experience has become part of my relationship with the cove. The 3 a.m. sounds as much a feature of the cove's identity as the morning mist and the evening calm. I've lowered a hydrophone, the underwater microphone that I purchased for the particular purpose of recording the sounds that the cove produces at 3 a.m. The device lowered from the dock to a depth of approximately 30 feet, the microphone positioned in the water column above the lake bed where the buildings sit, the recording equipment on the dock capturing whatever the microphone detects. The recordings are clear, the creaking is there, the structural sounds captured by the microphone with the particular fidelity that direct underwater recording provides. The sound quality better than what my ears detect from the surface, because the microphone is in the medium that the sound is traveling through rather than at the boundary between the water and the air. The recordings show wood under stress. The frequency analysis that I've performed with software confirms that the sounds are consistent with the acoustic signature of wooden structural members bearing load, the particular frequencies that wooden beams produce when they're being stressed by forces that the beams are designed to resist. The buildings are creaking, 70 years underwater, on the bottom of a lake that covered a valley that held a community. The buildings that were left standing when the water rose are producing the sounds that buildings produce when they're occupied. I've played the recordings for 2 engineers. Both confirmed the acoustic signature of structural wood under load. Both noted that the sounds were inconsistent with the behavior of submerged debris. Both said the sounds were consistent with the behavior of occupied buildings. Occupied, the word that the engineers used and that I carry, and that the 3 a.m. sounds confirm with the particular frequency and clarity that the hydrophone captures and that the cove transmits through the water and through the air to the porch, where I sit and listen. The buildings on the main street of a community that was relocated 70 years ago are occupied. At 3 a.m., on certain nights, the structures that the water covered and that the decades should have destroyed are bearing the weight of occupancy and producing the sounds that occupied buildings produce. I don't know who occupies them. I don't know what occupies them. I know the sounds are real because the microphone captures them and the software analyzes them and the engineers confirm them. I know the buildings are down there because the historical maps show them and the occasional low water event reveals the debris that confirms their position. And at 3 a.m. the buildings creak. And the creaking is the creaking of structures that are being used. And the cove holds the sounds, and the cove holds the water, and the water holds the buildings, and the buildings hold whoever is in them. At 3 in the morning, on the main street, beneath the surface. In the community that was relocated but that apparently wasn't emptied. The people left, the buildings stayed. And at 3 a.m., 70 years later, someone is in them. And the wood creaks, and the water carries the sound, and the cove delivers it to the surface, where I listen, from the porch, above the main street, above the buildings, above whoever is still inside them. At 3 in the morning, in the deep, on the bottom, where the community continues. The lake is small, maybe 12 acres, a body of water that was created in 1934 when a man named Ashworth built a dam across a creek in a hollow in Patrick County, Virginia. The particular private engineering project that mountain landowners occasionally undertake when the terrain provides a suitable site and when the desire for a pond or a small lake justifies the construction that the terrain permits. Ashworth's dam was concrete, maybe 40 feet across and 12 feet high, the structure sufficient to hold back the creek that ran through the hollow and to create the body of water that now sits in the valley behind it, the lake filling the low ground of the hollow with the particular shape that the terrain dictated, the water finding the contours of the valley floor and filling them and producing the 12 acres of surface that the hollow's geography contained. The lake has been there for 90 years, long enough that the surrounding community considers it a permanent feature of the landscape rather than a construction, the particular conversion of man-made to natural that time produces when a body of water has been present for longer than anyone alive can remember its absence. The lake sits in the hollow with the particular quality of belonging that natural features have and that constructed features acquire over decades, the water and the banks and the trees that grow to the water's edge, all showing the particular maturity of a landscape that has been in its current configuration for long enough that the configuration feels original rather than Imposed. My wife Karen and I bought the lake house in 2019. The house sits on the north bank, facing south across the water. The particular orientation that provides the house with the view of the lake and the hollow beyond it that the property's value derives from. The house was built in 1987 by a family that bought the lakefront lot from the Ashworth estate and that constructed the house in the style that the era and the location dictated, a frame house with a stone foundation and a porch that runs the full width of the lake-facing side, the porch providing the particular vantage point that lake houses are designed around, the sitting and the watching, and the relationship between the occupant and the water that the porch mediates. The lake reflects the house. This is what still water does. The particular optical property of a calm surface functioning as a mirror, the reflection showing the house and the trees in the sky with the fidelity that the water's stillness provides. On calm mornings, when the wind is absent and the surface is flat, the reflection is so precise that the image in the water is indistinguishable from the reality above it. The house reflected with every detail intact, the windows and the siding and the porch, and the particular configuration of the building reproduced on the water's surface with the photographic accuracy that still water achieves. I know our reflection. 4 years of mornings on the porch, looking at the lake, looking at the house shown in the water. The particular image that the lake presents of the house is as familiar as the house itself. The reflection a daily companion to the reality, the water showing me our house the way a mirror shows me my face, the image expected and confirmed with each observation. July of 2023, a Saturday morning. I was on the porch with my coffee at approximately 7 o'clock. The July morning warm and still, the air holding the particular humidity that July in the Virginia mountains produces. The moisture in the air creating the haze that softens the distant ridges, and that at the lake's level produces the conditions that still water needs. The wind absent, the surface flat, the reflection performing with the particular precision that calm mornings provide. I looked at the lake, the coffee in my hand, the porch beneath me, the lake in front of me, the reflection showing the house behind me on the water's surface. The reflection was wrong. The house in the water was not our house. The reflection showed a structure that was smaller than our house, a building of different proportions and different architecture. The particular image on the water presenting a building that was not the 1,987 frame house with the stone foundation and the full-width porch, but something else, something older, something that belonged to a different period of construction and that occupied the site with a different footprint than our house occupied. The reflected building was a cabin, a log structure, the particular construction of a mountain homestead that predated the 20th century, the logs showing the hand-hewn faces and the chinking between them that the building methods of the 1800s produced. The structure small, maybe 20 feet by 15, the proportions of a single-room cabin with a loft, the particular architecture of the first generation of mountain settlement, when the settlers built with what the forest provided, and when the buildings were sized for the immediate needs of a family that was establishing itself on new land. A stone chimney rose from one end of the reflected cabin, the particular fieldstone chimney that mountain cabins carried, the stones fitted without mortar in the manner that the builders of that era used, the chimney showing the particular irregularity of stonework that was assembled by hand from the creek stones that the hollow provided. The cabin had a door in the center of the front wall and a window on either side of the door, the particular configuration of a cabin that faces the terrain with the standard arrangement of entry and light that the building method dictated. I looked behind me. Our house was there, the 1,987 frame structure with the stone foundation and the porch, and the siding and the windows that Karen and I had been living in for 4 years. Our house, unchanged, sitting on the bank in the configuration that it had occupied since the builder completed it 36 years ago. I looked at the lake. The cabin was in the reflection. The particular image on the water showing the log structure and the stone chimney and the door and the windows and the particular character of a building, that was not our building, and that was not the building that the water should have been reflecting. The surrounding reflection was correct. The trees that the water showed were the trees that grew on the bank. The sky that the water showed was the sky that hung over the hollow. Everything in the reflection, except the house, was accurate. The particular mirror function of the water performing correctly for every element of the scene except the building, the lake showing the current landscape with a substituted structure, The cabin replacing our house in the reflection, the way an actor replaces another actor in a role, the setting the same and the character different. Karen was still inside. I called her to the porch. The particular need for a witness, the experience too significant to hold alone. She came out with her coffee, and she looked at the lake, and she saw the cabin. The confirmation arriving in the form of her particular intake of breath, the sound that a person makes when they see something that contradicts what they expect, the particular auditory signature of surprise that says, "I see it too." We watched. The cabin sat in the reflection with the particular stability of an image that was not flickering or wavering or showing any visual instability that would suggest the reflection was an artifact or a distortion. The image was stable. The cabin was clear. The details were specific and consistent. The logs and the chimney and the door maintaining their appearance in the water's surface with the same fidelity that our house normally maintained. The reflection performing its function with its usual precision while reflecting the wrong building. 40 minutes. The reflection showed the cabin for approximately 40 minutes, the duration measured by the coffee that I drank, and the progression of the morning light that July provides, and the particular sense of time that sustained observation of something impossible produces. 40 minutes of looking at a cabin in the water that was not on the bank, the reflection and the reality disagreeing about what occupied the property, the water saying cabin and the bank saying house, and the 40-minute stretching between the two assertions. The reflection shifted. At approximately 7:40, without transition, the cabin was gone, and our house was in the water, the reflection returning to its correct image, with the particular abruptness that the previous substitution had used to arrive, the change occurring not through a fade or a blend, but through a replacement. The cabin not there, and our house there in the same instant, the water resuming its mirror function for the building that actually sat on the bank. I photographed the reflection during the second occurrence. 3 weeks later, the same conditions, the same calm morning, the same flat water, the reflection showing the cabin instead of the house. I took 12 photographs from the porch. The camera aimed at the water's surface. The lens focused on the reflected image that my eyes showed as the cabin and the chimney and the particular architecture of a building that predated the lake. The photographs showed our house, every frame, the 1,987 frame structure, reflected in the water with the particular accuracy that photography provides, the camera documenting what the water was actually reflecting rather than what my eyes were perceiving, the lens and the sensor, and the particular honesty of optical recording, showing our house in every image, while my eyes, looking at the same water at the same moment, showed the cabin. The camera sees the house. The eye sees the cabin. The water holds both, the current structure and the previous one, the particular palimpsest of a property that has held different buildings at different times, and that the water's surface occasionally reveals, showing not the current configuration but the historical one, the cabin that occupied the site before the lake was created and before our house was built. I researched the property, the county records showing the ownership history, the particular chain of title that mountain properties maintain through the decades and the centuries of occupation. The lot where our house sits was homesteaded in the 1840s by a family named Dalton. The Daltons built a cabin on the site, a log cabin with a stone chimney, the particular structure that the settlement era produced and that the family occupied until the 1920s, when the last Dalton on the property sold the land to Ashworth, the man who would build the dam and create the lake. The cabin was demolished when the lake was created, the structure removed to make way for the water that would cover the low ground and that would eventually provide the lakefront lot that the 1,987 house was built on. The cabin was gone before the water rose. The building existed from the 1840s to approximately 1,933, 90 years of occupancy on the site where our house now sits, 90 years of a cabin and a chimney and a door and windows on the bank of a creek that would become a lake. The lake reflects a building that was demolished 90 years ago. On certain mornings, when the water is still and the conditions align, the surface shows the cabin that the Daltons built rather than the house that we bought, the water's memory extending further back than the water's existence, the reflection accessing a configuration of the property that predates the lake itself. The camera shows our house, the eye shows the cabin. The water holds both images and displays them according to a schedule that I can't predict and that the conditions don't entirely explain. The Daltons lived here, on this bank, in the cabin that the water remembers. looking at a creek that would become a lake that would reflect a house that would replace the cabin that the water still shows. And on certain mornings, the reflection is honest, not about what is on the bank now, but about what was on the bank first. The cabin and the chimney and the door, reflected in water that didn't exist when the cabin stood, but that remembers the cabin anyway. The lake reflects what it chooses, and what it chooses, on certain mornings, is the truth that the land held before the water came. And the camera disagrees, and the eye insists, and the water holds both. And the cabin sits in the reflection, patient, waiting, showing itself in the surface of a lake that covered the ground where it stood. The Dalton's cabin, in our lake, on our mornings, reflected by water that remembers what the land forgets. I fish from the dock because the dock is where the fish are, and because the particular geography of my cove on the lake in the Nocturnal Mountains positions the dock at the edge of a drop-off, where the shallow water near the bank transitions to the deep water at the cove center, the particular underwater terrain that bass use as a feeding edge, and that the dock's position at the boundary between shallow and deep makes the dock the best fishing spot on my property without requiring a boat. The lake is a reservoir in the mountains of western North Carolina, one of the bodies of water that the power companies created in the early 20th century by damming the rivers that the Nantahala Range channels through its valleys, the dams producing the lakes that the power generation required, and that the recreational economy eventually converted from industrial infrastructure into the particular lakefront lifestyle that mountain reservoirs provide. The lake sits at approximately 3,000 feet, the water cold and deep, the coves cutting into the mountainsides with the steep-sided geometry that mountain reservoirs produce, the terrain dropping sharply from the banks to the cove bottoms, where the original creek beds run and where the deepest water sits. My cove is approximately 60 feet deep at its deepest point, the depth measured by the fish finder that I mounted on the dock post when I moved to the property in 2016, the sonar unit providing the particular underwater view that the technology makes available, the screen showing the lake bed and the structure and the fish as the colored shapes that sonar renders from the acoustic data that the transducer collects. I use the fish finder the way any dock fisherman uses one, checking the screen before I cast to determine what's beneath the surface and where the fish are holding, and whether the conditions favor the particular fishing that the cove provides. I know the cove's bottom. 7 years of fish finder data, the screen showing the same underwater terrain thousands of times, the particular topography of the cove committed to memory, the way the terrain above the surface is committed to memory, the drop-off in the creek channel and the ledges, and the particular structure that the base used for holding and feeding, all cataloged in the mental map that repetition builds. I know what the sonar shows in my cove. The bottom at 60 feet, the ledges at 40, the drop-off at 20, the particular underwater architecture of a mountain cove rendered on the fish finder's screen with the consistency that a fixed terrain provides. November of 2022. A Thursday afternoon, the weather cold and clear, the November conditions producing the particular fishing that late fall provides on mountain lakes, the base moving to the deeper water as the surface temperature drops, the fish holding on the ledges and the structure at the depths that the cooling water drives them to. I was on the dock with a rod and the fish finder running, the screen showing the cove's bottom with the standard rendering that the sonar provided, the terrain display showing the 60-foot bottom and the ledges and the particular shapes that the cove's underwater features produced. The shape appeared on the screen at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Not the blip that a fish produces, the small, discrete mark that the sonar renders when a single organism passes through the transducer's cone and reflects the acoustic signal back to the unit. Not the solid mass that the lake bed produces, the continuous return that the bottom generates when the sonar reaches it and bounces back. Something between those two, a shape that was larger than any fish and smaller than the bottom, and that the sonar was rendering at the deepest point of the cove, sitting on the lake bed at approximately 60 feet. The shape was approximately 20 feet long. The fish finder screen provides a scale that allows the user to estimate the size of objects that the sonar detects, the particular calibration that the technology maintains between the acoustic data and the visual display, allowing me to measure the shape against the scale and determine that whatever the sonar was showing was approximately 20 feet in length and approximately 3 feet in width, the proportions of a long, narrow object resting on the bottom of the cove at the maximum depth. I adjusted the sensitivity, the particular troubleshooting step that a fish finder user performs when the screen shows something unexpected, the sensitivity control allowing me to increase or decrease the unit's response to sonar returns, and to determine whether the shape on the screen was a real object or an artifact of the settings, a ghost image or a bottom bounce, or any of the particular false returns that sonar technology produces when the conditions or the settings generate signals that don't correspond to actual objects. The shape was real. Every sensitivity setting showed it. The shape maintained its size and its position and its particular rendering on the screen through every adjustment that I made. The sonar consistently returning the acoustic data that said something 20 feet long was resting on the bottom of the cove at 60 feet. The shape was solid, the return strong, the particular density of the sonar image indicating an object that was reflecting the acoustic signal with the efficiency that solid objects produce. The return too strong for a school of fish, and too discrete for a section of bottom, and too consistent across sensitivity settings to be an artifact. I watched the screen. The shape was stationary. For approximately 2 hours, from 3 o'clock to approximately 5, the shape sat on the bottom at the cove's deepest point without moving. The sonar showing the same image in the same position with the particular stability of an object that is at rest and that is not being affected by current or by any other force that would cause it to move. Nothing in the lake is 20 feet long. The particular fact that the experience reduced to and that the 2 hours of observation reinforced with each minute that the shape remained on the screen. The lake holds largemouth bass that reach maybe 8 pounds and maybe 24 inches. The lake holds trout that the state stocks and that reach comparable sizes. The lake holds catfish that can grow larger, but that even at their maximum size in this lake don't approach 20 feet. The largest organism in the lake, by any measurement that the fisheries data provides, is maybe 3 feet long. The shape on the screen was 20 feet. The disproportion between the known biology of the lake and the size of the shape on the sonar was the particular impossible fact that 2 hours of watching reinforced. At approximately 5 o'clock, the shape moved. The particular transition from stationary to mobile occurring on the screen with the visual clarity that sonar provides, the shape shifting from its position on the bottom and beginning to track laterally across the cove's floor, the movement showing on the display as the shape's position changing relative to the fixed terrain features that the cove's bottom provided as reference points. The movement was slow, deliberate, the particular pace of something that was moving under its own power and that was moving with the unhurried speed of an organism that is large enough that urgency is not a characteristic of its movement, the shape crossing the cove's bottom at a pace that I estimated at maybe 1 mile per hour. The slow traverse of something that was covering the distance between one side of the cove and the other, with the particular patience of a body that moves slowly, because slow is its nature, rather than because slow is required by the circumstances. The shape maintained its depth, 60 feet, the bottom of the cove, the shape tracking along the lakebed without rising into the water column, the movement confined to the bottom the way the movement of a bottom-dwelling organism is confined to the bottom, the shape using the lakebed as its environment and navigating the terrain at the particular depth that the cove's deepest section provided. I watched the shape cross the cove, 30 minutes, approximately, the sonar showing the 20-foot form moving from the east side of the cove's bottom to the west side with the steady, deliberate pace that the initial observation had established. The shape moved smoothly, the screen showing a continuous track that indicated a sustained, controlled movement rather than the jerky, intermittent movement that current-driven debris would produce. The particular quality of the tracking saying self-propelled rather than passive. At the western edge of the cove, the shape descended. The sonar showed the shape moving downward from the 60-foot bottom toward deeper water, the depth reading increasing as the shape tracked away from the cove and toward the main lake body, where the depth exceeded the fish finder's range. 65 feet, 70, 75. The shape descending below the cove's bottom into the deeper water that the main lake channel provided, the sonar tracking the shape until the depth exceeded the transducer's capability, and the shape disappeared from the screen. Gone. The particular absence of a sonar return that had been present for 2.5 hours. The screen showing the cove's normal bottom and the normal structure and the normal fish marks and the absence of the 20-foot shape that had been sitting at 60 feet and that had crossed the cove at 1 mile per hour, that had descended into water too deep for my fish finder to reach. I've watched for it since. Every fishing session, the fish finder running, the screen monitored with the particular attention of a man who saw something on his sonar that the lake's biology doesn't explain, and who wants to see it again, because seeing it again would confirm the first observation, and because confirming the first observation would convert the experience from possible malfunction to confirmed presence. The shape has returned twice, both times in November, both times in the afternoon, both times appearing at the cove's deepest point and resting on the bottom for a period of hours before moving. The second observation showed the same size, the same depth, the same stationary period followed by the same slow lateral movement. The third observation showed the same parameters, 20 feet, 60 feet of depth, stationary for hours, then moving, then descending into water that the fish finder can't reach. The consistency is the detail. 3 observations over 2 Novembers, each showing the same shape at the same depth with the same behavior, the pattern suggesting not a random occurrence but a regular one, the shape visiting the cove on a schedule that November provides, and that the conditions of November at 3,000 feet in the Nocturnal Mountains produce. Something 20 feet long lives in the deep water of the lake and visits my cove in November and rests on the bottom at 60 feet and then moves and then descends to depths that my equipment can't follow. The sonar says so. 3 times. The same shape, the same size, the same behavior. The lake holds what the lake holds. At 60 feet, on the bottom, in November, 20 feet long, moving slowly, patient and large and using the cove for whatever 20-foot organisms use coves for in the deep cold water of a mountain reservoir in the Nocturnal range. And the fish finder shows it, and the fish finder doesn't lie. And the shape moves across the bottom with the particular deliberate pace of something that has been in this lake for a long time, and that the lake has been holding for a long time, and that the sonar reveals, and that the depth conceals. And I fish from the dock, and the line goes down, and the water is 60 feet deep, and something 20 feet long is at the bottom. Most Novembers. Dale Hollow Lake sits on the Tennessee-Kentucky border in the Upper Cumberland region, the reservoir that the Army Corps of Engineers created in 1943 by damming the Obey River, the water backing up through the hollows and the valleys and creating the particular shape of a mountain reservoir, the main body of the lake branching into coves and inlets that follow the drainages that the flooding filled, the shoreline irregular and extensive, the lake occupying the terrain with the particular intimacy that reservoirs produce when the water fills every low place that the mountains provide. My house is on a cove on the Tennessee side, the particular inlet that a drainage created when the lake filled it, the cove extending maybe 400 yards into the hillside with my property on the south bank, and the property across the water on the north bank, the 2 houses facing each other across approximately 300 yards of lake surface, the particular geography of a cove where 2 lakefront properties share the water and the view, and the particular visual relationship that neighbors across a cove maintain, each house visible from the other, the lights and the activity, and the particular presence of habitation observable from porch to porch across the water. The Hendersons lived across the cove. Ray and Martha Henderson, a couple in their 70s who had owned the property since the 1990s, and who had been the kind of neighbors that lake properties produce, the particular neighborliness of people who share a cove and who wave from their docks, and who occasionally visit by boat, and who maintain the relationship that proximity and shared water create without the particular intensity that sharing a property line produces. The Hendersons were good people, quiet, the house across the cove lit in the evenings, the windows showing the warm glow of occupation, the particular evidence of a couple living their retirement on a lake in the mountains, the lights coming on at dusk and going off at maybe 10 when they went to bed, and the house going dark and the cove holding its nighttime quiet. Ray died in March of 2019. A stroke, sudden, the particular departure that strokes produce when the event is massive, and the time between the onset and the ending is measured in hours rather than months. Martha died 4 months later, in July. The particular sequence that long marriages sometimes produce when the surviving spouse follows the departed spouse with a promptness that the medical community attributes to various causes and that the mountain community attributes to the particular unwillingness of a person to be in the house, alone after 50 years of being in the house together. The estate entered probate. The children, who lived in Nashville and in Memphis, and who had the particular relationship with the lake property that children of lake house owners maintain, the visits and the memories but not the daily connection that residence provides, began the process of settling the estate that the courts require and that the complexity of 2 deaths and a property and the particular legal machinery of probate produces. The process has been ongoing for 4 years. The house has been unoccupied since Martha's death. 4 years of vacancy on a lake in the mountains of Tennessee produces a particular quality of deterioration that the house across the cove has been demonstrating. The paint fading from the particular blue that Martha had chosen to the washed-out gray that sun and rain produce on paint that nobody refreshes. The dock sinking, the flotation drums losing their buoyancy, the dock surface tilting toward the water that is slowly claiming it. The yard overgrown, the grass that Ray maintained with the particular attention that retired men bring to lawn care, converting to the meadow that uncut grass becomes when 2 growing seasons pass without a mower. The house has been dark for 4 years. The particular darkness of an unoccupied house, the windows showing nothing, the building holding the dark, the way a closed box holds the dark, the light that the Hendersons provided every evening from the windows that faced the cove absent since July of 2019, when Martha left and the house lost its last source of illumination. March of 2023, a Thursday night. I was on the porch at approximately 10 o'clock, the particular evening habit of a man who lives on a lake and who spends the last hour of the day on the porch, with the particular routine of a nightcap and the lake and the quiet. The March night was cool, the lake surface showing the particular stillness that March produces when the weather is stable, the cove dark, the Hendersons' house showing as a dark shape on the north bank, the building visible as a silhouette against the slightly lighter tree line behind it. The lights came on, every window simultaneously, the house converting from dark to lit in a single instant, the particular visual impact of a building that has been a dark shape for 4 years, suddenly producing light from every window, the change so abrupt and so complete that the visual system processed it as a physical event, the particular startle that a sudden change in a familiar environment produces, the dark house that I'd been looking at for 4 years, suddenly lit as if someone had thrown a master switch and activated every light in the building at the same moment. The cove was illuminated, the light from the windows reaching across the water and touching the surface with the particular warm glow that house lights produce on dark water, the reflection of the lit windows showing on the cove surface, the way the Hendersons' lights had shone on the cove surface every evening for the years that they'd been alive and in the house, and providing the light that the windows carried across the water. Every window, not some windows, not a single light in a single room that might indicate a trespasser with a flashlight or a squatter who had found a way in and had activated a circuit. Every window in the house was lit, the light showing from the ground floor and the second floor, and the particular configuration of illumination that a fully lit house produces. Every room occupied by the light that the fixtures provided, the house performing the particular display of a building that is lit for living, the lights on because the house is occupied and the occupants need the light. I watched. The porch, the nightcap in my hand, the cove between me and the lit house, the 300 yards of dark water holding the reflections of windows that had not been lit in 4 years. I watched for the particular evidence of occupation that lit windows should provide, the movement of people in the rooms, the passing of a figure across a window, the particular visual information that a lit house transmits to whoever is watching from across the cove. No movement. The windows were lit, and the rooms behind them showed the light, without showing any activity within it. The illumination stable and uninterrupted, the particular quality of lights that are on in rooms that nobody is moving through, the light serving no one, the rooms lit for the purpose of being lit rather than for the purpose of illuminating the activities that people perform in rooms. No vehicles. The Hendersons' driveway, visible from my porch as a lighter strip ascending from the lake to the county road above, showed no vehicle. The driveway was empty, the particular absence of a car or a truck confirming that nobody had driven to the house and that the lights had been activated without the arrival that human activation would require. I called the power company. The next morning, the particular inquiry of a man who has seen lights in a house that should not have lights and who needs the utilities' confirmation of what the utilities records show. The representative checked the account. The service at the Henderson property had been disconnected in February of 2020 when the estate stopped paying the bill. The disconnection was physical. The meter pulled from the socket, the particular act that utilities perform when they terminate service at an unoccupied property. The meter removed from the connection that provides the electricity that the house uses. No power. The house had no power. The meter was not in its socket. The electrical service that would provide the energy that lights require was physically disconnected, the particular absence of the mechanism that makes lights possible, confirming that the lights I'd watched for 3 hours were burning without the electricity that lights need to burn. I went across the cove the following morning. By boat, the particular approach that lake properties use when visiting is easier by water than by road. The boat crossing the 300 yards of cove in maybe 5 minutes and nosing up to the Henderson's deteriorating dock, I tied up and walked to the house. The house was dark. The particular darkness of an unoccupied house in the morning, the windows showing nothing, the interior visible through the dirty glass as rooms that were empty and dim and holding the particular quality of spaces that have not been used in 4 years. The furniture was there, covered in the dust that vacancy produces, the rooms arranged in the configuration that Martha had maintained and that the emptiness had preserved. No lights were on. No switches were in the on position. The particular inspection of every room confirmed that no light fixture in the house was activated and that no light was burning. The meter box on the exterior wall showed the empty socket. The meter pulled, the connection absent. The house as disconnected from the electrical grid as a house can be, while still having the infrastructure that once connected it. The lights have come on 4 more times since that March night, always at approximately 10 o'clock, the hour that the Hendersons used to turn their lights on for the evening, the particular time that the routine of their lives had established, as the hour when the house was lit and the cove was illuminated and the windows showed across the water to whoever was watching from the south bank. Always every window. Always for approximately 3 hours, the duration that the Hendersons' evening typically lasted, the lights going off at approximately 1 a.m., the hour that a couple who went to bed at 10 would produce if the lights ran for 3 hours after they went to bed, the particular timing of lights that were left on in the living areas while the occupants slept. The lights are the Hendersons' lights. The timing is the Hendersons' timing. The pattern is the Hendersons' pattern. The house performing the evening routine that Ray and Martha maintained for the years they lived there, the lights coming on at 10 and burning until 1 and the cove showing the reflections that the occupied house used to produce. The house has no power. The meter is pulled. The estate is in probate. The Hendersons are dead. And the lights come on. At 10, every window. The house lit, the way the house was lit when Ray and Martha were alive and in the rooms, and providing the particular presence that the lights represented. And the cove holds the reflections, the warm glow on the dark water, the particular evidence of a house that is occupied and that is lit for the evening the way it was lit for every evening for 25 years. And I watch from the porch, across 300 yards of water, the lights burning in a house with no power for people who are no longer there. The evening routine continuing, the lights performing, the house remembering what it was asked to do every night for 25 years, and doing it, without power, without the Hendersons, without any mechanism that electricity explains. The house lights up at 10 for 3 hours. The Hendersons' evening, the Hendersons' schedule, the Hendersons' lights, in a house that has no power, on a cove that has no neighbors. For whoever watches from the south bank, the way I watch, with my nightcap, on the porch, looking at lights that shouldn't be on and windows that should be dark. And the cove holds the reflections, the way it always did, when they were alive. The lake house was my retirement plan, not the financial plan, not the particular calculation of savings and investments and the accumulated decisions that a career in accounting produces over 30 years. The emotional plan, the particular vision of what the years after work would hold and where those years would be spent, and what the mornings would look like when the mornings no longer required the commute and the office and the particular routine that employment imposes. The lake house was the vision, the water and the mountains and the porch, and the particular peace that a man who has spent 3 decades in an office imagines when he imagines what the office's absence will feel like. I bought the house in 2020, 2 years before the retirement that would make the house my full-time residence. The property is on a lake in the mountains of western North Carolina, a reservoir that sits at approximately 2,800 feet in the Nocturnal range, the water dark and deep and cold, the particular mountain lake that the southern Appalachians produce when the terrain provides a valley and the dam provides the water, and the decades provide the particular maturity that converts a reservoir into a landscape feature that feels as natural as the mountains that surround it. The house sits on a cove, a quiet inlet on the lake's north shore, the cove extending approximately 400 yards into the mountainside, the water deep and still, the banks forested to the waterline, the particular privacy that a cove provides when the nearest neighbor is across the main lake, and when the cove's shape blocks the boat traffic and the noise that the main lake carries during the summer months. The cove is mine in the particular way that proximity creates ownership, the water that the house faces and the dock extends into, and the morning show and the evening show belonging to whoever lives on its shore by the simple fact of daily presence. I retired in 2022. The full-time move to the lake house completing the plan that the purchase had begun, the house converting from weekend retreat to permanent residence, the mornings that I'd imagined during the office years becoming the mornings that I lived, the coffee on the porch, and the water visible, and the mountains beyond the water, and the particular satisfaction of a plan that reached its conclusion. The bedroom faces the cove, the window above the bed providing the view that the house was designed to provide, the water visible from the pillow, the cove showing its surface through the glass in every condition that the weather and the light produce, the moonlight on the water visible when I wake at night, and the dawn on the water visible when I wake in the morning. August of 2022, the first full summer at the lake house, the particular season when the lake demonstrates the complete range of what it provides, the warm days and the cool evenings and the water at its warmest, and the cove showing the particular beauty that August produces at elevation, when the humidity is moderate and the thunderstorms are brief, and the lake holds its surface in the particular equilibrium that August maintains. I woke at approximately 1 in the morning. The August night warm enough that the window was open, the screen admitting the air that the cove provided, the particular mountain air that the lake and the elevation produce at night, when the temperature drops from the day's warmth into the 60s and the air carries the moisture of the lake and the particular freshness that mountain nights hold. The moonlight was on the water, the August moon providing enough illumination to show the cove's surface, with the particular detail that moonlight on still water achieves, the surface visible as a dark mirror that reflected the light and that showed whatever was on it or in it. Someone was swimming in the cove. In the middle of the water, approximately 200 yards from my dock, a figure was in the lake and the figure was swimming. Not the splashing of a person who has fallen in, not the thrashing of a person in distress, not the casual paddling of a person swimming near shore for recreation. Swimming, the particular deliberate locomotion of a swimmer who is covering distance, the stroke visible in the moonlight as an arm rising from the water and extending forward and entering the water and pulling, the particular crawl stroke that distant swimmers use, the movement rhythmic and consistent and strong. I sat up in bed, the window showing the cove and the swimmer, the figure visible in the moonlight at the distance that 200 yards provides, the details reduced by the distance to the essential information of movement and direction and pace. The swimmer was moving south, toward the point that separates my cove from the main lake, the stroke carrying the figure through the water at a pace that I estimated at maybe 2 miles per hour, the particular speed that a strong swimmer maintains when they're covering distance in open water. The swimming was steady, not the variable pace that fatigue produces, not the slowing and the recovery that a swimmer exhibits when the distance exceeds their endurance. Steady, the stroke maintaining its rhythm and its power and its particular consistency over the 20 minutes that I watched, the arms rising and falling with the mechanical regularity of a swimmer who is not tiring and who is not going to tire. I watched for approximately 20 minutes. The swimmer covered the length of the cove, approximately 400 yards, the figure traveling from the cove's center toward the point at the southern end, the stroke maintaining its pace, the body moving through the water with the particular efficiency that strong swimming produces, the swimmer generating no unnecessary splash, no wasted motion, the stroke clean and practiced, and showing the particular technique of someone who has been swimming for a long time and who swims the way walkers walk, automatically, the body performing the motion without the mind's conscious direction. The swimmer reached the point. the particular geographic feature where my cove meets the main lake, the bank narrowing to a rocky promontory that separates the cove's water from the open lake. The swimmer rounded the point and was gone, the figure passing from the cove into the main lake and disappearing from my view, the point blocking the line of sight that the cove's straight axis had provided. I went to the porch, the particular impulse to continue the observation, to track the swimmer beyond the point, to see where the swimming was going. The porch provided a wider view, the main lake visible beyond the cove's mouth, the water surface showing in the moonlight for maybe a quarter mile. The swimmer was not visible. The main lake's surface was still, the particular flat quality of calm water, showing nothing that moved, no figure, no stroke, no disturbance. The temperature of the water. This is the detail that converted the experience from strange to disturbing. The lake at this elevation in August holds water at approximately 68 degrees. The particular temperature that the depth and the altitude and the season produce, the water cold enough that extended immersion without thermal protection, produces the particular physiological responses that cold water imposes on the human body. At 68 degrees, a swimmer without a wetsuit begins losing core temperature within 20 minutes. At 68 degrees, extended swimming produces the shivering and the confusion and the particular cascade of hypothermic symptoms that cold water generates in a body that is losing heat faster than it can produce it. At 68 degrees, the particular window of safe swimming is approximately 40 minutes before the body's core temperature drops to the point where the swimming becomes dangerous and the swimmer's ability to continue is compromised by the cold that the water is imposing. The swimmer I watched was swimming at 1 in the morning in 68-degree water without a wetsuit, the figure showing only the body and the stroke, no neoprene, no thermal protection, the particular exposure of a person swimming in cold water at night without the equipment that cold water demands. The swimmer has returned 5 times since that first night in August, the figure appearing in the cove at approximately 1 a.m., the swimming steady and strong, the stroke consistent, the figure covering the length of the cove and disappearing around the point. Always at 1, always the same direction, south toward the point, always the same pace, the particular 2-mile-per-hour speed that the strong crawl produces. Always alone, the single figure in the dark water of the cove at an hour when nobody should be swimming, and in water that was too cold for the unprotected swimming that the figure was performing. I went to the dock on the 3rd occasion. The particular escalation of a man who has watched something 3 times from his bedroom window and who needs to observe it from a closer position. I stood on the dock at approximately 12:45, waiting for 1 o'clock, the dock extending into the cove, the water audible beneath the boards, the August night dark around me. 1 o'clock. The swimmer was there, appearing in the cove at the position where I'd first observed the swimming, approximately 200 yards from the dock, the figure visible in the moonlight, the stroke beginning with the particular rhythm that I'd observed from the window, the arms rising and falling, the body moving south through the dark water. From the dock I could hear the swimming, the particular sound that a swimmer produces, the splash of the entry and the pull of the stroke, and the particular rhythm of breathing that crawl swimming requires, the head turning to the side for the inhalation and returning to the water for the exhalation, the breathing pattern audible at the distance of 200 yards in the quiet of the 1 a.m. cove. The sounds were correct, the particular acoustic signature of a strong swimmer performing a crawl stroke in open water, every sound consistent with what the visual information showed. I called out. The particular decision of a man standing on a dock at 1 in the morning watching someone swim in cold, dark water, the voice projected across the 200 yards with enough volume to reach the swimmer, the words a standard inquiry about whether the swimmer was all right and whether they needed assistance. The words carried across the water with the clarity that still air and flat water provide. The swimmer did not respond. The stroke continued, the pace unchanged, the direction unchanged, the figure moving south through the cove with a particular indifference to my voice that said the voice had either not been heard or not been relevant. I watched from the dock as the swimmer covered the remaining distance to the point, the stroke steady, the pace consistent, the figure rounding the point and disappearing from view. The cove was still. The water was dark. The 1 a.m. quiet of the mountain lake resumed. Nobody lives on the cove except me. The nearest lakefront property is on the main lake, across the water, maybe half a mile from the point where the swimmer disappears. No boats are on the cove at 1 a.m. No vehicles are parked at the access points that the lake provides. The swimmer arrives in the cove without any visible means of having entered the water and disappears around the point without any visible destination. I've checked the water temperature during the occurrences. 66 to 68 degrees, the particular range that the lake maintains in August and into September at this elevation. Cold enough that extended unprotected swimming is medically inadvisable, and that the duration of the swimming, at least 20 minutes in the cove and presumably continuing beyond the point, exceeds the safe exposure time for a swimmer without thermal protection. The swimmer doesn't tire. The swimmer doesn't respond. The swimmer appears at 1 and swims south and disappears, and the cove holds its silence, and the water holds its cold, and the particular phenomenon of someone swimming in a mountain lake at 1 in the morning repeats at intervals that can't predict and that the conditions don't explain. Someone swims in my cove at 1 a.m. in cold water, in the dark. The stroke strong and steady and showing the particular endurance of a swimmer who is not subject to the limitations that cold water imposes on living bodies, and who covers the distance with the particular ease of someone who has been swimming this water for a long time. Longer than I've been here. Longer than the house has been here. Perhaps longer than the lake has been here. The stroke rises and falls. The body moves south. The point takes the swimmer from view, and the cove is still, and the water is cold, and 1 a.m. comes again, and the swimmer returns, always at 1, always south, always strong, and the cold water holds whoever swims in it, the way the lake holds everything, patient, deep, dark, and the swimming continues. Nantahala Lake sits at approximately 3,000 feet in the mountains of western North Carolina. The particular reservoir that the Nantahala Power and Light Company created in the 1940s, when the dam was built across the Nantahala River and the valley behind it filled with the cold, deep water that the mountains provided. The lake is remote in the way that western North Carolina lakes are remote. The access roads narrow and winding, the shoreline sparsely developed, the particular quality of isolation that the Nantahala Range provides, ensuring that the lake retains the particular mountain character that the more developed lakes in the region have lost. I bought the lake house in 2015. A cabin, really, a log structure on the lake's western shore that was built in the 1960s by a man who wanted a fishing cabin and who built one with the particular attention to function and the particular indifference to aesthetics that mountain men of that generation applied to their recreational structures. The cabin is small, 2 rooms and a kitchen and a bathroom added in the 1980s. The building sitting on the bank above the lake at a point where the shoreline provides a flat area large enough for the cabin and the dock, and the particular infrastructure that lakefront living requires. The canoe is an aluminum Grumman, the 17-foot model that Grumman manufactured from the 1940s through the 1990s, and that constitutes the particular standard vessel of mountain lake recreation, the aluminum hull indestructible by the standards that recreational watercraft are measured against, the boat capable of absorbing the impacts and the scratches, and the particular abuse that Rocky Mountain Lake shorelines impose on the hulls that contact them. I bought the canoe used in 2015 when I bought the cabin. The previous owner, including the canoe in the sale as part of the property's equipment, the boat having been at the cabin for an unknown number of years and having served an unknown number of previous paddlers. I stored the canoe overturned on the bank beside the dock. The particular storage method that aluminum canoe owners use, the boat flipped upside down on the grass, the hull exposed to the sky, the interior protected from the rain and the debris that the trees deposit on every horizontal surface that the forest canopy overhangs. The canoe sits in the same spot, the grass beneath it compressed into the particular flattened shape that a canoe's hull produces when it occupies the same position for months. The impression in the grass showing the boat's outline when the boat is removed, and the grass showing the compressed evidence of the boat's presence when the boat is returned. October of 2022. The October nights at 3,000 feet in the Nantahala Mountains produce the particular cold that elevation and season combine to deliver, the temperatures dropping into the 30s, the air sharp and dry, the lake surface showing the particular stillness that cold air produces when the thermal differentials between the water and the air are minimal and the convective winds that temperature differences generate are absent. The lake at night in October is still, the surface flat, the moonlight reflecting off the water with the particular quality that still mountain water provides. The lake a dark mirror that shows whatever the sky holds. I woke at approximately 4 in the morning. The particular wakefulness that the body produces without an identifiable cause, the eyes opening with the focused alertness that says something has changed in the environment and that the something requires attention. The bedroom window faces the lake, the glass showing the cove and the dock and the bank, and the particular view that the cabin's position provides of the water that the property borders. The canoe was on the lake, not at the dock, not drifting near the bank in the shallows where a canoe that had slipped its storage position might drift if the wind or the grade had moved it. On the lake, approximately 100 yards from the shore, sitting on the water's surface in the open cove, the aluminum hull showing in the moonlight with the particular brightness that aluminum produces when the moon hits it at the right angle, the metal reflecting the light with a quality that distinguishes it from the dark water surface. The canoe visible as a bright shape on a dark surface. The canoe was upright, sitting on the water in the position that a canoe occupies when it's being used. The hull in the water, the gunwales above the surface, the bow and the stern showing the characteristic profile that a Grumman 17-footer produces when it's floating. The boat in its operational configuration on water that was 100 yards from the bank where I'd left it overturned on the grass. Someone was in the canoe, a figure seated in the stern, the silhouette visible against the lighter surface of the water that extended beyond the canoe, the figure showing the particular shape of a person seated in the stern position of a canoe, the position that the paddler occupies when they're operating the canoe alone, the stern seat providing the weight distribution that a solo paddler needs to maintain the boat's trim. The figure was sitting in the paddling position, the body upright, the posture showing the particular orientation of a paddler who is seated and who is facing the bow and who is positioned to paddle. The figure was not paddling. The canoe was motionless on the still water, the hull producing no wake, the boat sitting on the surface with the particular absence of movement that a stationary watercraft displays when the water is calm and the occupant is not propelling the vessel. The figure sat in the stern and the canoe sat on the water, and neither was moving. The boat and the occupant forming the particular tableau of a paddler who has stopped paddling and who is sitting in a canoe on a lake at 4 in the morning in October. I went to the bank. The particular impulse of a man who is seeing his canoe on the water with someone in it and who needs to confirm the visual information with the physical evidence that the storage location provides. The spot where the canoe had been stored was empty. The grass showed the compressed impression of the canoe's hull, the particular flattened area that the boat's weight had produced over the months of storage, the outline clear and specific, the canoe's shape recorded in the grass that it had been lying on. The canoe was not on the bank. The canoe was on the lake. The canoe had been moved from its storage position to the water, a distance of approximately 20 feet from the bank to the waterline. The boat carried or dragged or transported from the grass to the lake and launched and paddled or drifted 100 yards from shore. I had not heard it. Aluminum canoes on gravel banks produce a particular sound when they're moved, the metal hull scraping the stones and the grit that the shoreline provides, the particular grinding noise that aluminum on rock generates, and that is audible from inside the cabin, because the cabin is 20 feet from the bank, and because the sound of metal on rock is the particular sound that carries through walls and through sleep. I had heard nothing. The canoe had been moved from the bank to the water without producing the sound that moving an aluminum canoe produces. I stood on the bank and I looked at the canoe on the water. The figure in the stern was visible in the moonlight, the silhouette showing the head and the shoulders and the torso and the particular posture of a seated paddler, the details obscured by the distance and the darkness, the figure a dark shape against the lighter water, the identity and the features and the particular characteristics that would make the figure a person rather than a shape hidden by the 100 yards of dark air between the bank and the boat. I called out. The particular projection of voice across water, the words carrying over the 100 yards with the clarity that still air and flat water provide, the acoustic properties of the cove amplifying the voice and delivering it to the canoe. I asked who was there. I asked what they were doing. The words arriving at the canoe and the figure in the stern producing no response, no movement, no acknowledgement that a voice from the bank had reached the boat. The canoe sat on the water. The figure sat in the stern. The particular stillness of both producing the quality that I've described in other experiences, the absence of the movement that living occupancy produces, the figure showing none of the small adjustments that a person makes when they're sitting in a canoe on water, no shift of weight, no turn of head, no movement of hands. I went back to bed. Not from comfort, not from the particular acceptance that a situation is normal. From the particular assessment that the situation was not something I could affect from the bank at 4 in the morning, and that the canoe on the water was going to be on the water whether I watched it or not, and that the watching from the bank was accomplishing nothing except the particular accumulation of observation without comprehension. I woke at dawn. The October dawn arriving at approximately 6:30, the light growing in the particular gradual way that mountain dawns produce when the ridges delay the sun and the pre-dawn gray extends for the minutes that the terrain requires. I went to the window. The canoe was on the bank, overturned, in its storage position, the hull showing the particular coating of dew that the October night deposits on surfaces that have been exposed to the air for the full duration of the overnight hours, the aluminum showing the moisture uniformly across the entire hull, the dew pattern consistent with a surface that has been in the same position for the entire night. I went to the bank. The canoe was in its spot, the grass beneath it compressed in the familiar outline. The hull showed no watermarks, no evidence of recent immersion, the particular dry condition of an aluminum surface that has been upside down on grass and that the water has not contacted. The canoe looked like a canoe that had been overturned on the grass since the last time I'd used it, the storage condition unchanged, the position unchanged, the particular state of a boat that has not been moved. The grass between the storage position and the waterline showed no drag marks. The particular evidence that moving an aluminum canoe across grass and gravel produces, the compressed path and the displaced stones and the particular trail that a canoe's keel creates when it's dragged to the water, was not present. The grass was undisturbed. The gravel was undisturbed. The canoe had been on the water at 4 a.m. and was on the bank at 6:30, and the ground between the two positions showed no evidence of transit in either direction. It has happened 3 more times, October, November, once in March. Each time I wake at approximately 4. Each time the canoe is on the water, 100 yards from shore, upright, occupied by the figure in the stern. Each time the figure is motionless. Each time the morning shows the canoe on the bank, overturned, dew-covered, showing no evidence of recent use. The canoe moves from the bank to the water and back without producing evidence of the movement. The figure sits in the stern without paddling and without responding and without producing any indication that the figure is a person in the conventional sense of a person being something that moves and speaks and acknowledges. Someone uses my canoe at 4 in the morning, in the dark, on a mountain lake, at 3,000 feet. Someone who takes the canoe from the bank to the water without scraping the aluminum on the gravel, and who sits in the stern 100 yards from shore, and who returns the canoe to its storage position before dawn, and who leaves the hull, showing the dew of a surface that has been in place all night. And the canoe is mine during the day, and the canoe is theirs at 4 a.m. And the sharing produces no evidence, except the particular wakefulness that finds me at 4 o'clock on certain nights, and the particular image of a canoe on a lake with a figure in the stern who sits and doesn't paddle and doesn't respond and looks at whatever the 4 a.m. lake shows to whoever sits on it at that hour. And the morning takes it back, and the canoe is on the bank, and the dew says it's been there all night. And it has. And it hasn't. And the lake holds what it holds, in the dark, at 4, in a canoe that is mine and that is not only mine. I've lived on the lake for 12 years, which means I've observed 12 winters of water that doesn't freeze. This is the particular characteristic of mountain lakes in western North Carolina that distinguishes them from the lakes that people in other regions associate with winter, the frozen surfaces, and the ice fishing, and the particular solid state that cold weather produces on bodies of water at higher latitudes and lower elevations. The lakes here don't freeze. The combination of depth and the moderate winter temperatures that the southern Appalachians maintain at the elevations where the reservoirs sit keeps the water above 32 degrees through the entire winter, the surface remaining liquid from November through March, the lake performing its function as a body of water without the seasonal interruption that ice imposes on lakes that are further north or that are shallower, or that the climate subjects to the sustained cold that freezing requires. The dock is a wooden structure, maybe 40 feet long, extending from the bank into the cove on posts that are driven into the lake bed. The particular construction that lakefront properties in this region use, the decking providing the platform for the boat and the fishing and the sitting that dock life includes. The dock has been part of the property since before I bought it. the structure maintained through the years by the succession of owners who have invested the particular care that wooden docks in mountain lakes require, the boards replaced as they deteriorate, the posts inspected, the hardware checked, the dock maintained in the functional condition that recreational use demands. I know the water around the dock. 12 winters of observation, the surface liquid in every one of them, the water moving with the particular gentle current that the cove produces even in winter, the circulation that the lake's depth generates, keeping the surface in motion and keeping the temperature above the threshold that freezing requires. The water temperature in February sits at approximately 41 degrees at the surface, the particular temperature that the lake maintains at this time of year, cold enough that swimming would be unpleasant, and warm enough that the water remains liquid with a margin of 9 degrees above the freezing point that ice requires. February of 2023, a Wednesday morning. I woke at approximately 6:30, the February dawn providing the gray light that the season produces at this hour, the bedroom window showing the cove and the dock and the water in the particular flat illumination that pre-dawn provides, the details visible as shapes and tones rather than the full color detail that the later morning would supply. The dock was surrounded by ice. The particular visual information arriving at my brain with the delayed processing that impossible observations produce, the eyes reporting what the eyes were seeing, and the brain requiring time to reconcile the report with the known behavior of a lake that doesn't freeze. The water around the dock, in an area that extended approximately 50 feet in every direction from the dock center, was frozen. The surface showing the particular flat, white-gray quality that ice produces on still water, the frozen surface sitting where the liquid surface had been the previous evening, the transformation occurring overnight, the liquid converting to solid in the hours between my last look at the cove at approximately 10 p.m. and my first look at the cove at 6:30 a.m. I got dressed and went to the bank. The February morning was cold, maybe 28 degrees. The particular cold that February mornings in the mountains produce, the air sharp and the frost visible on the grass and the dock boards, and every surface that the night had exposed to the temperature. The cold was normal. 28-degree mornings were standard for February at this elevation. What was not standard was the ice. The ice began at approximately 50 feet from the dock in every direction. The boundary between the frozen surface and the liquid surface was sharp, the particular edge that ice produces when it forms on a body of water, the frozen area showing its flat white surface, and the liquid area showing the dark water that the lake normally displayed, the two states of water occupying adjacent sections of the cove, with a boundary between them that was as defined as a line drawn on the surface. Beyond the boundary, the lake was liquid, normal, dark, showing the particular movement that the cove's gentle current produced, the water doing what water does in February at 41 degrees, remaining liquid, maintaining its state, performing the particular physical behavior that water at that temperature is obligated by the laws of thermodynamics to perform. Inside the boundary, the lake was frozen, 2 inches of ice, the thickness that overnight freezing produces when the conditions are right, except the conditions were not right. The water temperature was 41 degrees. I checked it. The thermometer that I keep on the dock post, the device that I use to monitor the water temperature, because the water temperature is relevant to the fishing and to the particular curiosity that a man who lives on a lake develops about the body of water that his property borders. The thermometer read 41 degrees. The probe was in the water at the dock's near end, in the liquid water at the edge of the ice, the sensor measuring the temperature of the water that was 9 degrees above freezing, and that was nonetheless frozen in a 50-foot radius around the dock. I walked onto the ice. The particular test of a man who needs physical confirmation that the surface he's seeing is the surface he thinks he's seeing, the boots stepping from the dock boards onto the frozen surface with the tentative weight placement that ice commands, the body committing its weight gradually, the feet testing the surface before the full load is applied. The ice held. 2 inches of solid ice, the particular density that clear ice provides, the frozen surface supporting my 180 pounds without cracking, without sagging, the ice performing as ice performs when it's thick enough to bear the load. The ice was clear. Mountain lake ice, when it forms on still water, produces the particular transparency that allows the lake bed to be visible through the frozen surface, the ice functioning as a window into the water below, rather than as an opaque barrier. The shallow end of the dock, where the water was maybe 4 feet deep, showed the lake bed through the ice with the particular clarity that clear ice provides, the rocks and the sediment and the particular features of the bottom, visible through 2 inches of frozen water. The water beneath the ice was not frozen. I could see the liquid water beneath the ice's surface, the particular layer of water between the ice and the lake bed showing the movement that liquid water displays. The gentle current visible through the clear ice as a motion in the water below, the frozen surface sitting on top of liquid water that was moving, and that was at 41 degrees, and that had somehow produced 2 inches of ice on its surface, despite being 9 degrees too warm for ice. I checked the temperature at the ice's surface. I drilled a small hole with the ice auger that I keep in the shed for the particular purpose that ice fishing in other locations provides, and that I'd never expected to use on this lake. The auger went through 2 inches of ice and into the water below. The thermometer in the hole read 41 degrees. The water under the ice was the same temperature as the water beyond the ice. The entire cove at the same temperature, the thermal conditions identical inside the frozen zone and outside the frozen zone, the ice existing on water that was 9 degrees too warm to produce it. The ice lasted 3 days, Wednesday through Friday, the frozen circle around the dock maintaining its 50-foot radius, the ice solid, the boundary sharp, the liquid lake beyond the boundary unchanged. For 3 days I walked on ice that shouldn't have existed on water that was too warm to produce it, the particular impossibility of the condition persisting through 72 hours of observation and measurement, and the particular sustained disbelief that impossible physical conditions produce in a person who understands the physics and who is watching the physics be violated. The air temperature during those 3 days ranged from the mid-20s at night to the mid-40s during the day. The particular February conditions that the mountains produce, cold enough to maintain existing ice but not cold enough to create new ice on water at 41 degrees. The ice didn't grow during the 3 days. It didn't thicken. It maintained its 2-inch depth and its 50-foot radius with the particular stability of a condition that had been established, and that was being maintained by whatever had established it. Saturday morning, I woke and looked at the cove, and the ice was gone. The water around the dock, showing the normal liquid surface that 12 years of winters had displayed, the dark water moving with the gentle current, the dock posts standing in liquid water, the 50-foot radius that had been frozen for 3 days, now liquid, and showing no evidence that it had been frozen. The transition had occurred overnight. Friday evening, the ice was there. Saturday morning, the ice was not. The frozen surface returning to liquid in the same overnight window that the liquid surface had become frozen in. The reversal matching the formation, the ice appearing in one night and disappearing in another. The water temperature Saturday morning was 41 degrees. The same temperature it had been before the ice, the same temperature it had been during the ice, the same temperature it had been beneath the ice. The thermal conditions unchanged by the 3 days of impossible freezing and the subsequent thawing, the lake maintaining its 41 degrees through every state that the water had occupied. I contacted a limnologist at Western Carolina University, a scientist who studies lakes and who maintains an interest in the particular behavior of mountain reservoirs in the southern Appalachians. I described the event, the localized freezing, the 50-foot radius, the water temperature, the 3-day duration. She listened with the particular attention that scientists apply to observations that their training doesn't accommodate, the listening careful, the question specific, the analysis proceeding through the possible explanations that her expertise provided. She had no explanation. Localized freezing on water at 41 degrees is not a phenomenon that limnology accommodates. The physics doesn't permit it. Water at 41 degrees does not freeze. The conditions that produce freezing, the sustained cold that drops the water temperature to 32 degrees across a sufficient area for sufficient duration, were not present. The air temperature was not cold enough. The water temperature was not close enough to freezing. The particular thermal conditions that ice formation requires were absent by a margin of 9 degrees, the deficit large enough that no known mechanism could bridge it. She asked if I was certain about the temperature readings. I said the thermometer was calibrated and consistent and had been providing accurate readings for 12 years. She asked if the readings could have been affected by the ice. I said the readings were taken in the liquid water at the ice's boundary and in the liquid water beneath the ice, and that both readings showed 41 degrees. She said the observation described an event that the physics of water does not produce. The physics doesn't produce it, the lake produced it. The particular body of water that my property borders and that my dock extends into, and that 12 years of observation has shown me as a lake that doesn't freeze produced ice on its surface in a 50-foot radius around my dock, at a water temperature that is 9 degrees above freezing. The lake did something that water doesn't do for 3 days around my dock. The particular localized impossibility of ice on warm water occurring at the specific location where my property meets the lake, the freezing centered on the dock that connects my land to the water, the ice surrounding the structure that bridges the boundary between the terrestrial and the aquatic. The dock stands in the water surrounds the dock. And for 3 days in February, the water around the dock decided to freeze, despite the temperature that said it shouldn't. And then it decided not to freeze. And the water returned to liquid, and the 41 degrees continued. And the dock stands in liquid water every winter, the surface moving, the temperature stable, the lake performing its 12-year pattern of not freezing most winters. And I check the dock in February now, every morning, looking for the ice that the physics says can't form and that the lake formed anyway. 50 feet, 2 inches, 3 days, on water at 41 degrees. The lake decides what the lake decides, and the physics accommodates, or doesn't, and the ice forms anyway.